NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States. And in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from the Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer on this wonderful May morning. We're up early here recording the podcast just before 8 a.m. So it's a little earlier than Mr. Reifer's used to getting up, but I'm an early bird these days.
I'm a reasonably early bird too. I just have dog walking responsibilities, among other things in the morning that I've got to take care of.
Yeah. Taking care of the pups is always important and an integral part of my day-to-day life these days with 3 of them. We've got 1 Australian Labradoodle and 2 Australian Shepherds. And, we're just preparing for the Women's World Cup is basically what it is. We have exclusively Australian named dogs. None of them, of course, are from Australia. They are all from the state of Oregon. But yeah, those are our pups. And Finn, Tegan, and Porter. That's the trio.
Jerry's just a big mutt. I got him genetically. I got for Christmas after I adopted Jerry. I got one of those dog genetic test things, and I did it on Jerry. And his biggest category by far is he came in a little bit over 60% which was not helpful, but also I think kind of just demonstrates the point that he is just a big mutt.
A mutt through and through. That's always good to spend money on one of those tests, and then it tells you absolutely nothing about it.
That's right. Luckily, I got exactly what I paid for because it was a gift. So
yes,
nothing ventured, nothing gained for me there. But yeah, he's just a big old beefcake though. He's weighing in at about 90 pounds. So
oh man.
So yeah, he likes to get after it in the mornings. Needs his morning 30+ minute walk. Otherwise, the day can be a disaster.
Yeah, could be destructive for sure.
And did some special lollygagging this morning. I think because there were some thunderstorms, unusual morning thunderstorms in Portland. That's not a thing in Portland that we get very often. If we get them, we always get them in the evening. So some unusual, morning thunderstorms in the distance that I think were probably disruptive to his normal, walking routine.
Exactly. So, shifting gears from our pups to the folks on the field for the Timbers and Thorns this weekend. It was a couple of games that once again I missed due to vacation usage, and once again extremely exciting games and positive results for both of the teams. Right? It seems I may be the problem. It is a 3-0-0 record for the Timbers when I'm not there, and the Thorns pull off this excellent draw against Angel City. But we'll start.
Was it excellent? It was dramatic.
Exciting is the word I was thinking of,
yeah.
And the word excellent came out of my mouth. So
exciting, but nonetheless, I think disappointing. But we'll get to that.
Yes, we will get down to brass tacks with regard to the Thorns, but starting with the Timbers, obviously an important victory for them on the road, 2-1 at St. Louis, and a game that they showed themselves to be improving, to be in better form. Jimmy Chara came in and was fiery from the get-go and had that game-winning goal. It was, despite the fact that it seems to be a 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation with the injuries, particularly, a huge, piece of news with David Ajala going down with an ACL tear. Now the second defensive-oriented midfielder for the Timbers to go down with the same injury this year after Eric Williamson. Getting thin in that spot, a spot that is now occupied by Diego Chara, who is 37 years old and still as durable as ever, and Christian Paredes, who is just coming off a hamstring injury and has now been thrust into a regular starting role, with Noel Caliscan being the newest addition and really the only player on the bench that is naturally at that position. So you're talking about being thin at 2 very important central defensive positions in the midfield and at center back. And that's scary, particularly given the concerns that the Timbers have with regard to how they've defended in some of their rougher matches this season. But I thought they defended really well against St. Louis and were able to contain them. I thought that, they were mature and they handled the game well. Just watching those highlights, it seems to me
very mature highlights.
Yeah, mature highlights. They're rounding into, and I, just for posterity, I did watch a good portion of that game before I left for the activities with the family that I had on Saturday. But still, everything I heard from Gio, he's tends to lean positive in terms of his team, but genuinely That's feels true. Like this team is starting to potentially turn a corner in terms of its performances, but you can't turn the corner unless you go all the way around the corner, let's say. And they're just approaching that corner, I feel like, with this victory. And this is an important month of May with winnable games, a lot of home games that you got to take care of. And the first one obviously being against Austin on Saturday. But what were your impressions, Chris, of that performance from the Timbers against St. Louis?
So I think we now have enough data to highlight a trend, which is actually the Timbers defending pretty well. And this is not an entirely new phenomenon since that horrible pillow fight against the Galaxy in late March. The Timbers have only conceded in MLS play. I'm literally counting as we do this, so give me a moment. I think they've conceded 6 goals in 6 games. That's pretty good. If you've got a GAA of about 1, you're a good defensive team. They've got a couple clean sheets in that time. They have only, I think it's actually 5 goals in 6 games now that I'm counting better. They have only given up multiple goals once. That was on the road at Cincinnati. And that was, it's not like that was a heavy loss. That was a 2-1 against a team that is very good on the road. And so I think if you look at that stretch as a whole, I think there's reason to be pleased with the way the Timbers have defended, notwithstanding some of the personnel issues that they've had in terms of injuries and in terms of failed signings. But also, just sort of collectively as a team, I think they've done a nice job after being really open to start the season to kind of getting things tightened up and back first. That is not a new thing for Gio's teams. It's kind of a familiar pattern of the Timbers enter the season. They're open. They're a bit naive. They get overrun, and then they kind of sort it out eventually, and they get things locked down defensively and get into a little bit better stead in terms of their defensive work. And so I think that's all a positive development for the team. But this was a good win. And that's not to say that St. Louis is a juggernaut. They have not been recently. After this game, they're 1-3-1 in their last 5. They're sort of coming back down to earth after that scintillating 5-0-0 start. but they were without Joao Klaus, who has been really important for them up top and has been one of their primary danger men in terms of scoring goals. All of that notwithstanding, a road win in MLS is very good. And there's no reason to believe that even, sort of coming off their early season heater, that St. Louis is, that's not going and winning at Kansas City, which the Timbers are going to have to do soon. Just a deeply, deeply incompetent Kansas City team. I think we highlighted that a week or two ago. It's worth doing again because they have 3 draws through 10 games, and that's it. They have 3 points in 10 games.
Absolutely dreadful side. One of the worst.
Historically bad.
One of the worst ever. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not like that. So this was a really good win. I thought Cristian Paredes had his best game as a Timber. He was the best player on the field. It wasn't particularly close. It is weird to me that Evander got the call for Team of the Week and Paredes was on the bench. Evander, I thought found some good spots, but wasn't particularly dangerous. Paredes was a head above everybody else on the field. And when he came on for Ayala, he was a two-way force that really allowed the Timbers to seize the game. And so, I think that is very exciting to now see him rounding back into fitness and form. If that continues, that's a game changer for this Timbers team. But and I thought their approach to the game was very smart, which was after an opening 10 or 15 minutes in which the Timbers had quite a bit of the ball and created some chances out of it. They kind of sat back a little bit and let St. Louis have the ball and dared St. Louis to break them down with the ball and then sort of ambushed them in vulnerable moments. And that's exactly the way to play this St. Louis City team, right? When they've been successful, it's been because they've played really effectively against the ball. They have not been a team that has been, using the ball to break teams down, and to control games with the ball. And by forcing St. Louis to carry that and to carry a lot of the possession, I thought the Timbers really exposed them quite a bit. And so I think they got the tactics spot on. I think Gio's approach going into the game was spot on. And I think they really got some big performances from guys like Paredes, from Jimmy Chara coming on as a substitute, from Santiago Moreno, who had another good game, and from Zach McGraw, who they will not have next week as a result of yellow card accumulation, which is a shame and potentially a very big problem. But who nonetheless was very good in this game. So overall, I think you're very excited about the way the Timbers played. I think, from what we saw late against Seattle, what we saw in, a quality loss at Cincinnati, and then that they repeated in this game, I think there's reason for optimism finally for this Timbers team. They've got to get a little bit healthier. They've got to get Asprilla back. They've got to get McGraw off of suspension. This would be a tremendous game to be debuting that spring center back signing that they made or did not make, as is the case. And I think there are going to be concerns about that. And going into games in May that, I don't think they can afford to drop, very many of these games that they should have a chance to win. And a home game against a really struggling Austin team is very much a game that they should feel like that they should win and that they need to win. And they're pretty vulnerable because of how thin they are at the back. But there are other reasons for optimism. Hopefully seeing more of Jimmy Chara, hopefully seeing 90 minutes out of Paredes that I think should have the Timbers feeling like this is an opportunity for them to go and attack.
Yeah. And I think that two guys are really the engine that can make this turnaround go. And that would be Santiago Moreno, who I think is rounding into much better form. He's more comfortable on the wing. And so, being slotted back in there has allowed him to to regain his form after a really brutal start to the season for him. Just no goal contributions through, I think, like 6 games. Playing in a midfield role primarily, but still you would think somebody that they have hyped up that much would have been able to contribute more, and who really lived up to the hype towards the end of last year. That's not to say that, the Timbers have oversold Santi. Santi has sold himself well. That being said, it's him and Evander who I think are the engines that will make this go. If the defending is still strong and consistent the way it has been the last several weeks, unlocking Evander has been something that has felt close the last couple of weeks, but save for the penalty, which I thought he took brilliantly and did a great job on. It's
got
been
got Berkey moving early and just put it the other way.
Yeah, it's been a lot of almost for him. Like, he's had a lot of flashes and moments where you're like, wow, like, this guy is a serious playmaker. He can put in some really dangerous set pieces that change the way that this team plays. So much of the success that Portland had scoring last year, despite its woes, came off the set piece. And with no Bill Tuiloma, there hadn't really been somebody on this team yet until Evander came back that was a proven consistent threat. Not having McGraw on Saturday is obviously a major blow. I think, we've talked about it week after week that he's been one of the most important players for this team this year. And just the lack of depth at center back makes that really tenuous, right? You're talking about either starting Mabiala at that spot next to Zuparic after Mabiala definitely struggled in his time that he last played. And it was evident. I mean, they, defending Toronto, he was really, really struggling, and showing Cincinnati. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Correct. And
quite different cities.
Very different cities. Different food, different availability of chili in those two cities. But I don't know. Can you get good chili in Toronto?
Kind of an interesting the chili poutine connection.
Okay, there you go.
But I don't know. Yeah. There's nothing connecting Cincinnati and Toronto, I don't think.
Yeah, but
other than perhaps the stretches of futility that their respective clubs have had in MLS, and really forgets that before Toronto got good, which was before they got bad again, but even before they got good, they were the competitors with Chivas USA for the Wooden Spoon, and then Cincinnati, of course, being the Wooden Spoon Kings. Coming into MLS with 3 in a row.
And what a turnaround it's been for them. They've really, that team and that club has turned it, complete 180 from that situation. So, but continuing to speak to the center back situation, I mean, Liam Ridgewell was the fill-in center back at practice this week, like at the training that was open to the media. He's still got something in the tank, but he's not going to be signed to a 10-day or anything. I mean, he's not going to step in there on Saturdays and we can assuage those concerns, considering he hasn't played in a couple of years. But it's
too many gray hairs.
These
days for Liam.
Yeah, but he was holding his own, and you can always hear him. Of course, he was communicating like a teammate and not like a coach, which I thought was fun just to see that for a stretch at training this week. But he's not walking through that door. It's going to be Eric Miller. It's going to be Larry Mabiala, and Miller is not necessarily a natural center back. He has had more success for the Timbers, I think, in an outside back role this year, just kind of filling in for Mosquera or filling in for Bravo at different points, or Rasmussen would be maybe in that spot. But in terms of availability, I mean, Blanco is available for selection. Gio talked this week about his status being week by week. So whether he sees minutes on Saturday is dependent on how he's feeling. It seems pretty fickle right now, the knee issue. He didn't really train very much this week compared to the week leading up to his return. And it seems more likely that he would see the field again in that U.S. Open Cup match coming up against Real Salt Lake to provide a similar opportunity for him to have a low pressure setting to keep trying. And it also leaves the window open for, club flexibility, which is something that Ned Grabavoy has talked about publicly, but that, who's to say the motivation in terms of when and how they're going to play him leading into this summer time, which there are decisions to make, right?
Yeah, they're going to be big decisions to make. And if he can't, if we can't get beyond, and this isn't to say that this should have happened already, but if they're not able to kind of get beyond the, we'll see how this week goes, phase with him, I think that's going to become a really acute decision.
Yes.
And so I think there's work yet to be done there. But I think the hope is very much that we see him at some point in the next couple of games, because if not, I think that's not a great sign.
Yeah, that would be a potential red flag for sure, of not only his recovery, but maybe how the team wants to handle that going forward. So something to keep an eye on there. Bravo will be available for selection on Saturday. The question is how many minutes. He had a calf issue that kept him out last week, and whether he's able to start or not is kind of up in the air at this point. Aspria's knee injury, he had some soreness last week, Gio said, and they kept him out for precautionary reasons, but at the same time, he was limited at training this week, was training on the side with Blanco and with Mora, both of whom have their share of knee issues. I mean, he's questionable for Saturday, so it may be a little more of a setback in his recovery than the club is leading on, but it's something to watch, because I think that Dyrone has since he's come back been a really positive contributor.
Yeah, been a very important player, and the reason it makes me a little bit nervous that this has flared up is a little bit of PTSD from the situation with Felipe Mora, in which he sort of similarly came back and got back from a similar seemingly minor preseason knee surgery, came back for a little bit, played a few games, went back on the shelf with a similar thing, and then ended up having to go in for a very, very serious and season ending and yet to be recovered from knee surgery last summer. So I think that's what causes some concern from the outside, not knowing the full details of it. We'll have to see how it plays out. Hopefully it's only a minor bump in the road and Asprilla is back in full stead soon. But I think that's probably why, if you're a little bit nervous about the situation with Asprilla, that's why.
Yeah, it does feel in many ways, like I said before, like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing with their health. Whether they can finally break out of this and feel like a mostly fully healthy team, save for obviously the major injuries to Williamson and Ayala, and maybe get Felipe Mora back this summer, which is the targeted window. June, July is what has been said before. I've yet to see him run at training, so that's an indicator there in terms of when he might be available. It's a lot of stretches, a lot of resistance training. He's done some work with the ball, but they're not going to rush him back because they signed him to a lengthier extension at a lower money number, and he's one of those 2 players, Blanco included, who Ned Grabavoy has said publicly they are thinking about what the use of the amnesty provision might look like with either of those 2 players to free up more money to allegedly improve the team, right? But
which, by the way, in light of that extension, which was done at the end of last season, so it was done after he had this surgery and after this most recent injury popped up, the fact that he's in consideration, even for the use of the amnesty provision, I think raises some questions in its own right about whether they have handled the situation correctly. Now, that extension has gotten them some immediate cap relief, because his average annual value number, which is the number that's most important for a TAM or DP level player's cap hit, has gone down as a result of the extension. So it got him some immediate relief. But I think there's going to be some questions about that extension if this recovery ultimately fails.
One more piece of Timbers related news that we can touch on briefly is the estimated valuation from Sportico, which I found to be one of the more interesting stories of this week in the soccer realm. Timbers are valued at $685 million, which puts them at 29th in the world, according to Sportico's rankings. That's just behind Napoli, the Serie A leaders, at 690 million estimated, and just above West Ham United, who are kind of in cellar dweller territory in the Premier League. Sometimes middling, but closer to the bottom right now.
But
closer
nonetheless,
to
a
relegation.
powerhouse in Ted Lasso.
Yes,
West Ham.
That's true. And I haven't watched Ted Lasso, but I actually knew that there was that connection. But either way, like it's an interesting number. It's an interesting assertion. The idea that the Timbers are a top 30 club in the world in terms of value. There's a lot of layers to it. It's MLS is a single entity league. There is less money allocated to player compensation in MLS than in any of the 5 major sports leagues in the US, and then any of the major soccer leagues in the world. It's like something like 28-29% of revenue allocated to that. These valuations are based on revenue, and the fact that there is no relegation in MLS is a major factor as well to why they are above some of these Prem teams, because a West Ham has a chance of getting relegated and therefore taking a major revenue hit, whereas Sporting Kansas City is going to, no matter how bad they are this year, they're going to be in MLS next year and forever, as long as they don't move to another city. But even if they do, they'll still be in MLS. There's no folding going to be happening for any of these franchises. It's too big of a cash cow. When you look at these numbers, Chris, when you see on the surface the headline, the idea that the Timbers are a top 30 club in the world in terms of value, and that $685 million number, what comes to mind for you?
Not a lot. I don't put a lot of stock in these things. I don't think they're particularly relevant for fans because I don't think they're really related to. I mean, I think they're much more related to sort of the value of the entity and the business opportunities than they are to sort of fan experience in terms of what gets put on the field or the quality of play or anything like that. And so I don't put a ton of stock in these. I also question some of the methodology. I mean, it just doesn't, frankly, sniff as plausible that the Portland Timbers are one spot below Napoli in terms of global value of soccer teams. I think there are definitely things that make MLS and that make MLS clubs a little a bigger business opportunity and a different business opportunity than maybe some other things. Promotion and relegation certainly being one of them, or the absence of it here. I think just the size and the economic power of the United States market and the potential for growth is another factor. Although I think there are some headwinds there. And so, I think all of those things provide some conceptual support for the idea that some of these American clubs may be valued fairly highly, even compared to some of their more prestigious and frankly just better on the field European counterparts. But that much, I don't know. That seems like a little bit of a reach to me, but I don't know anything about any of this. I don't think it's all that important in terms of the fans' perspective. I think the more important point is the point that you made about the percentage of revenue spent on players and on player expenditures. Now, of course, that doesn't include transfer fees. Those things usually focus on salaries, but that's the same for every soccer league in the world. right? That makes it a little bit not quite an apples to apples comparison with the other American sports leagues, but it is an apples to apples comparison with Eredivisie and any number of the even sort of next tier down European leagues where MLS is still spending significantly less on player expenditures by compared to revenue than those other leagues. And so I think that's something that frankly is going to go into the players union's back pocket for future labor negotiations with the league. They are going to feature that prominently. It's been a difficult period for the players union, both because they had really unfortunate timing in that they came to their last labor agreement immediately before COVID. And in fact, they came to it so closely before COVID struck that it hadn't even been ratified once the COVID shutdown happened. And then once the COVID shutdown happened, all of a sudden the dynamics shifted completely. And the owners sort of reopened the agreement to sort of force the players to make some significant concessions that they didn't have to make in those first rounds. That certainly set the players back. They've also just been having to fight on a number of fronts where they haven't really been able to focus on sort of share of revenue devoted to salaries in the way some of the other players' labor organizations in other American leagues have, because they've also been fighting on just structural fronts. Getting free agency and improving travel conditions, and they've had all of these other issues where they haven't necessarily been able to focus on the singular issue of getting that percentage of revenue put into the camp of player salaries and dedicated to that camp. And so I think that'll probably change in the upcoming years as some of these structural issues have started to get ironed out. And I think this only also harkens back to the, ever-present call to fundamentally change the way MLS does its salary cap. I think getting rid of the salary cap altogether is unlikely, but I think there are growing calls from media sources and even from we've heard from a number of folks in front offices, not necessarily ownership, but certainly a number of sporting directors and the like, to go to a much higher overall salary cap and a much higher floor and to get rid of a lot of the interfencing. I don't know how much, and I don't think we know how much traction that has on the ownership end. That's where it matters. But we'll see. But in terms of the sort of top line numbers, I don't put a ton of stock in them. There are reasons to think that MLS clubs might have higher valuations than others, but those don't frankly matter very much to fans.
It does have that feel of sort of like a Forbes list of soccer teams, right? Like this has an audience of fans because they're interested in this generally, but there's also a smaller and much more powerful audience that would point to this article from Sportico, that would point to the numbers asserted here and say, hey, look at my big, beautiful asset that I have that is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more than frankly a lot of people around the world would think, right?
In Portland, that's an audience of one, though.
Yes, it is. And the way that the number is viewed by the owners is probably something exciting for them, right? The idea that they have this very prized asset that's worth all this money. But it also can serve, I think, as fuel to potentially a labor revolution in MLS that is long overdue, right? That these players who are unproven or who are trying to make a leap or who are at the tail end of a storied career come to this league, and in many ways, in terms of how their salary is structured and how much money they can make, comparatively, they are exploited. And that's something that this league has to contend with in terms of how it continues to grow and attract talent in the coming years, when some of the players, it's kind of like a paying your dues situation. You almost don't have have a choice necessarily if you want to make that jump from A to B to C, with C being Europe or a league slightly above MLS that you view as an upward trajectory for your career. A lot of layers to this. I don't take a ton of stock in the number either, but I think it's interesting. I think it's something that fans are interested in terms of the growth of MLS, what that looks like, and how it impacts the workers, the people who are playing between the lines every weekend in MLS. For me, that matters a lot more. So I'm more interested in how that evolves in the coming years.
I think that's right. And I think the chances of a labor stoppage at some point in the next couple CBA cycles are pretty high. But that's a little ways out. My vague recollection right now is that the current CBA doesn't expire until sometime after either 2027 or 2028. So there's a little bit of time there. And you know, and then, you know, whether they can get it ironed out, then probably have another round 5 years or so after that. I would think that there's a pretty good chance that in that, you know, 10 to 15 year horizon, we have a labor stoppage because of just these reasons. And because as the player pool has gotten a little bit more money put behind it, that makes it a little bit, that gives them more resources to be able to weather a labor stoppage, which has been a big issue in the past, where the MLS Players Union for a long time had a lot of voting members who really couldn't afford to miss too many paychecks, and the union didn't have the resources behind it to be able to weather a long labor stoppage. And as they get more money behind them, they have a little bit more of a war chest to be able to do that. And if these conditions remain, I think all of those dynamics point toward the likelihood of a labor stoppage at some point in the next 10 or 15 years. But it's not a today issue, simply because of the nature of the timing of the CBA cycles and how COVID really messed that all up in MLS. And unfortunately, I think that means the near term prospects for significant reform in MLS are quite low, because CBA negotiations are very often the tail that wags that dog. And the dog, as we know, has very little inclination to reform. So
I just thought of my own dog and his misbehavior and his lack of desire to reform himself can sometimes be frustrating. But let's move on from Timbers talk, from dog talk, and jump into one of the more exciting moments in recent memory for PTFC, in Bella Bixby scoring a back heel goal in stoppage time to get a 3-3 draw against Angel City. Really upset that I missed that moment in person. Bella said it was the loudest she had heard Providence Park in her time playing there, and that includes Crystal Dunn having a game-winning goal nearly at the death against San Diego in the semis last year. So that's a big statement, because that was an incredible moment, obviously, from Crystal. But such a cool situation for Bella, right? The goalkeeper goal is such a rare opportunity. And the fact that she and Michelle Betos, now with Gotham, are the two only players at the goalkeeper position in NWSL history to score a goal, both of whom did it with the Thorns, both of whom did it at Providence Park. Yeah, it's pretty surreal. And Bella's been
both equalizers in second half stoppage time, although that's less surprising because those are the only conditions in which a goalkeeper is going up for a set piece. But
that is correct.
Nonetheless.
Yeah, and two different goals too. Obviously a flying header from Betos versus what Bella did, which I think was really awesome, you know, to have that little flick like that and the instinct to when the ball came loose from the opposing goalkeeper's grasp, that she just quickly taps it in like that with her
not
back
too
of her
many
foot.
Goalkeeper back heel goals out there.
No,
Bella can lay claim to that one.
Bella was awesome, and it's so funny because Emma pointed this out to me. She's obviously a regular listener of this podcast, and she pointed out that last week we talked about how Bella is kind of underappreciated in terms of her contributions to the Thorns and how important she is to this team's success. And then bam, the next week, she's out there scoring a goal, and she's been asked about it a lot this week. Had a bunch of interviews. She's probably sick of it by now, but it's something that we got to highlight because it was just so much fun. The game, though, for the Thorns was maybe the continuation of some middling form from them lately. A little bit of a lull, I would say, in their expected dominance, right? With how talented, deep, experienced this group is, how much chemistry they have. Last couple of weeks have been a little bit, shaky for this team. And Mike Norris pointed that out this week at training, that they have a lot of learning lessons from the last several games, and not the least of which this Angel City game. They conceded 3 goals, and had to claw back and get a back heel from their goalkeeper to even draw it. So what were your impressions then, Chris, from that one?
Yeah, on the higher level, I should note, you got all the glory here. What a fun moment from Bella. Like that's something that you expect to see once in a lifetime, right? If you're a baseball fan, it's like a perfect game or a triple play or something like that. And Thorns fans now have been treated to be able to see twice a goalkeeper goal from their goalkeeper. That's really cool. Really fun moment for Bella. Don't want to take even a little bit away from that. That deserves like its own recognition in its own right. Really fun thing. The overall performance and the result, I think, is a little bit worrying, to be honest. And what concerns me most is actually the set piece defending that we saw in the second half. This is something that had been lingering in the back of my mind. The Thorns had been using a very, very, very zonal based marking system on set pieces, and it had worked out all right to date. There are people who are militant in being opposed to zonal marking on set pieces. I am not one of those people. I think zonal marking systems, I think basically everybody is to some extent zonal marking, probably not quite as much as the Thorns are. The Thorns have a lot of players marking zonally. I think most probably have a couple more players who are going player to player rather than zonal, but nonetheless, everybody's doing it to some extent. And the reason is because if you're marking up player to player, it gets really easy to get picked and to free up attackers that way. And so, almost everybody has at least a couple and sometimes even more players who are free. The Thorns have been going, I think, 6 at least players marking zonally, maybe even 8 at times. And I think that is, frankly, it just causes a concern about giving up exactly the kinds of goals on set pieces that they gave up in the second half against Angel City, which was just a ton of free runners. And I think the Thorns have a credible shout that there should have been a foul on Julie Ertz on what was the equalizer at 2-2, sort of clearing out Bella Bixby a little bit, preventing her from being able to make a catch or a punch that she probably would have been able to make otherwise, and allowing the ball to come through on the back post. I think that's a credible shout. I don't think it was an obvious foul. I'm not surprised that VAR didn't overturn it. Referee certainly would have been justified in calling it at the time, I think, but it's set pieces. You see contact like that a lot. And if we were calling that all the time, we would have a lot of set pieces that just resulted in fouls and we'd move on. So I don't think, I'm not scandalized by that non-call. But nonetheless, and then we come back a few minutes later and Angel City gets another one on the near post, and near post runs from unmarked players are one of the things that you're concerned about when you're marking in a scheme like the Thorns have used. And so I'm interested to see if they start to rethink that, if they dial that back a little bit, and sort of go away from the near pure zonal marking scheme that they've been using as a result of this. Because frankly, I expect that there are going to be other teams doing their homework and sort of copying Angel City in that respect. Whether they can be as successful, we'll see. This hasn't been a long-standing problem for the Thorns, but it certainly was this last weekend. But I think there's some heat now on this Thorns team. They have had a home-heavy early season schedule in the league. They're atop the table, so it's not like it's gone terribly. But they've definitely left some points on the table, right? I mean, the home game against the Dash, the home game against Angel City, those are games that you would hope that this Thorns team would be winning, and they didn't. And so I think there's a little bit of pressure now as the Thorns go on the road, go to North Carolina, somewhere where the Thorns have not had a lot of historical success. And then they go to San Diego thereafter, where they just dropped a Challenge Cup result that they probably should have gotten at least a point out of. There's some concern about whether this team is maximizing its results, about whether their good play is being translated into points. And I think they now have to go out on the road and show that they can get those kinds of results under more difficult conditions than where they've failed to get them in the last few weeks. So I think there's, for the first time this season, some genuine pressure on this Thorns team. I think you hear it a little bit in Norris's comments. And I'm very interested to see how they're going to respond.
Right. And, you spoke to defending, particularly set pieces, but defending generally is something that they were heavily focused on at training this week. Mike Norris pointed to that as a major area of concern for them, particularly given that, Becky Sauerbrunn is out with a foot injury. And what he told me yesterday was that it's going to probably be a couple weeks before she is available. That's big for these two games on the road at North Carolina and Houston, because it's harder defending on the road anyway, right? And without Becky Sauerbrunn, one of the great center backs of all time, that's going to be a challenge. And she was in first team NWSL best 11 player for the month. So she has started out this season really strong. The other two players, of course, being Crystal Dunn, who has been a really positive contributor in the midfield and just a consistent disruptor, in addition to obviously being a threat to score a goal at any moment. And then Sophia Smith, who's been nuclear, 4 goals, 4 assists in 5 games. It's defending is the big concern. Obviously, these two games, I think, are, as you alluded to, going to be one of the biggest tests, if not the biggest so far, for the Thorns, who, yes, they are undefeated at 3 wins, no losses, and 2 draws. Yes, they're atop the league table, but for now by a point. But they want more out of this. Karina LeBlanc was marching around training this week saying, we want 6 points, 6 points. That's what she was loudly saying, both in earshot of the media, but also in earshot of the players who very much have that same mindset. They want to go to North Carolina and get 3. They want to go to Houston and get 3 and reassert themselves as the dominant team that they know they can be, given their talent, given their experience. It's got to happen for them, and that's their mindset. And if they're able to pull 5-6 points, or 4 or 6 points out of this road trip, that's a win. And I think that they will maintain their position atop the table if they do so.
Well, they certainly will, just mathematically. And you're right, it is Houston next, and not San Diego, as I somehow got ahead of myself one away game. That's at the end of the month,
right?
But yeah, I mean, if they go and get 6 points, they will definitely remain atop the table, because nobody can get more than that in that period of time, and they're currently at the top of the table.
Big facts.
Yeah, big facts. But yeah, I mean, I think this is probably the highest pressure that they faced all year. The 3 sort of opening months best 11 selections, I think, were well deserved for the Thorns. Crystal Dunn in particular, I think, has been phenomenal and has become sort of a really key part of the Thorns engine that you weren't sure what you were going to get given her age and her experience and all of that coming into this year. She has been back into full form. And that has been huge for them. There has been an emerging partnership between Dunn and Smith that has been lethal. And that's been enormous for them. So I think those are well-deserved awards. But you're exactly right that Sauerbrunn and her absence, her importance over the first couple months has been enormous, and her absence is going to be significant. Now, the Thorns do have Emily Menges, who is also coming off sort of a lost 2022, but before that was one of the best and most consistent defenders in NWSL year in and year out for this Portland Thorns team. And so you like who the Thorns have to sort of step into that role in Sauerbrunn's absence, given that she's going to be out for some measure of weeks. Wouldn't surprise me if they're a little bit cautious bringing her back with the World Cup on the horizon. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's a little bit more than a couple weeks. But you like who the Thorns, unlike their male counterparts, who the Thorns have to bring off the bench at center back. And I very much think that they nonetheless can feel like they can go get these results, notwithstanding Becky's absence. But it's Becky Sauerbrunn, not an easy player to replace. And that's going to be a big challenge now for the Thorns going out on the road, when I think they very reasonably feel like they need to get some results in order to sort of keep the hold on this season that they established in the first few weeks of the season.
That game against North Carolina is on Saturday at 4:00 Pacific. Then the following Friday, the Thorns will travel to Houston. They're out on the road that whole time, so they won't be coming back to Portland. In between, it'll basically be about a 10-day road trip for them to both North Carolina and down to Texas. Probably a good time to get some barbecue, but they are high-level professional athletes, so maybe they won't be indulging as much as someone like myself would. But I digress.
Yeah.
They will be
what's
out
your
on
perspective as to more southeastern barbecue versus Texas barbecue? Are you a pulled pork person or are you a brisket person?
Well, I'm a brisket person generally, and I think that there's a recency bias here because I was just at Eam last night and had the white curry with the brisket burnt ends in it, and it's just, there are a few things I've eaten in my life that bring me more consistent joy than that white curry at Eam. Just love that place. Last time I was in there was on my birthday last year, and this time was just a prelude to going to see Beau is Afraid over at the Hollywood Theater, which was a very interesting experience to say the least. Not the theater, but the movie itself. I love the Hollywood. It's legendary, but I would need a whole nother podcast to talk about how I feel about Beau is Afraid as a diehard Ari Aster fan. There's a lot of mixed emotions in my mind right now, but brisket all the way.
Brisket all the way. I think that's a good shout. And it's very much where I fall. I appreciate some good pulled pork with like some good Carolina mustard, but forced to choose between the two, I'm gonna go sort of traditional Texan barbecue over your North Carolina pit bosses.
I would tend to agree, although I have yet to beat it North Carolina. Maybe if they have NWSL championship there this year, I can indulge in it. Who knows what the venue is going to be for NWSL championship? I don't know if we're even particularly close to finding that out, but you know what? I'll go wherever.
That seems like something that they're going to announce 3 or 4 weeks before the game.
It'd be cool if they announced it soon. I'd like to make some plans.
It would be cool
with regard to travel, but we'll see. That'll wrap it for us on Soccer Made in Portland. For Chris Reifer, I'm Ryan Clark. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Soccer Made in PDX. Like, subscribe, do all the things if you so choose. We'll be back next week to talk some U.S. Open Cup for the Timbers, some regular season action for the Timbers, and that first of two major. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.